Welcome everybody to the online course on the Nibbāna Sermons 23 to 33 by Bhikkhu Ñāṇananda, an e-learning course hosted by the Numata Center for Buddhist Studies at the University of Hamburg in collaboration with the Barre Center for Buddhist Studies in Massachusetts. And today we'll look at Sermon 26. But before that, a few of the comments from the online discussion. Robert Grosh commented on the last sermon statement. He says, I was a bit surprised to read it is because of personality view, Sakkaya Ditthi, that the world is carried away by this illusion. One goes on looking, saying that one is doing so, as there is something to be seen, but the seen is there because of the looking. Robert comments, I would have expected that in this passage reference would be to conceit and not to personality view. The way I understand the passage, not being carried away by this illusion, would imply just seeing the seen in the seen and not more, which I would have expected is only fully accomplished by an arahant and not by a stream enterer. Though one could argue that the stream enterer is already a good step ahead of the ordinary worldling in seeing just the seen in the seen, because he or she does not assume a permanent self. Yeah, I think Robert is right here. I think conceit would be probably a more appropriate terminology in that context. Kim Allen was also wondering about the reference to the music. She says, I do wonder though, when Bhikkhu Ñāṇananda talking about the music, and he states that at each step in that direction one is hearing a different music. That is, it is different from moment to moment. She says the music from moment to moment is indeed not literally the same, but is it truly different? He seems to be drifting towards the momentariness of later teachings. Yeah, I find myself that a little bit, I see that tendency there. But there was a reply by Robert Grosh to this comment, and he says, overall, I just understand the music simile in relation to the difference between the data that actually reaches our senses and what the mind then makes out of that. Or in other words, how in our own customary usage of the senses, in the herd there is not just the herd. Yeah, I appreciate that pointing out, helping to bring out the main point of the simile. And yeah, I agree with both. I do see a slight tendency towards momentariness in the stress that the music is just different at every moment, but I also see the point that Robert made there. Then Alexei Novak on the similes, the 5 similes for the 5 aggregates, and he was interested in exploring them from a practical perspective. So he writes, looking out and cultivating a view of form as foam, this seems to me a very clear practice. Likewise, perceptions as a mirage, and formations like a plantain tree, that there's no core to volition, just several non-core elements wrapped around each other. When we come to consciousness, the one that is emphasized in the sermon as the key, it becomes harder. Maybe it is harder to isolate the aggregate of consciousness. The image of the magic show is so powerful, like that of the cinema, and it makes logical sense. The perception machine appears to have 2 products. One comes out the front, as is the sense of the scene, the mirage of perception. The other is smuggled out the back as a byproduct, the magic show of consciousness. It is easy to point to something and say that is a perception, and in fact quite intuitive that these perceptions are mirages that might be more or less useful in different contexts. It is much harder for me to even point to something experienced and say, that is a consciousness, let alone go beyond that to see through it as a magic show. I particularly like that smuggling in at the back as a byproduct. Yeah, I think the pointing to something experienced and say that is a consciousness is really this looking back to that which knows. Even right now, listening to me talking, or if you see the video, seeing me talking, and instead of all the attention being, or hopefully at least a considerable part of the attention being towards what is seen, the content of what is seen and heard, to turn back to that which knows what is seen, that which knows what is heard. That is a very practical approach to recognizing consciousness in experience. Kind of still, receptive awareness of what is taking place. And Hedwig Krenz, she had replied to the interesting reflections by Alexei. She says, another way I perceive or make sense out of the magic show in consciousness is that I regard the magician as the I and the conceit I am. And with the magic wand, this imagined I is running the whole process of the huge machine of six sense door experience and creates papancha. So it is an image to illustrate how the I conceit creates all we perceive via the six sense doors, at the same time taking it as true because of not seeing through it. Also very beautiful. Good, with this now sharing from the discussion from the online forum, we are ready to go into sermon 26. Etang santang etang panitang yadidang sabba sankara samato sabbu paripatinisaggo tanhakayo virago nirodo nibbānam. This is peaceful, this is excellent, namely the stilling of all preparation, the relinquishment of all assets, the destruction of craving, detachment, cessation, extinction. With the permission of the most venerable great preceptor in the assembly of the venerable meditative monks, this is the 26th sermon in the series of sermons on Nibbāna. Even from what we have so far explained, it should be clear that the Rama Sutta enshrines an extremely deep analysis of the concepts of truth and falsehood, generally accepted by the world. We had to clear up a lot of jungle to approach this discourse, which has suffered from neglect to such an extent that it has become difficult to determine the correct one out of a maze of variant readings. But now we have exposed the basic ideas underlying this discourse through semantic and etymological explanations, which may even appear rather academic. The task before us now is to assimilate the deep philosophy the Buddha presents to the world by this discourse in a way that it becomes a vision. The Tathagata, who had an insight into the interior mechanism of the sixfold sense base, which is the factory for producing dogmatic views that are beaten up on the anvil of logic, takka pariyahata, was confronted with the problem of mediation with the worldlings, who see only the exterior of the sixfold sense base. In order to facilitate the understanding of the gravity of this problem, we quoted the other day an extract from the Pena Pindupama Sutta of the Kanda Samyutta, where consciousness is compared to a magical illusion. Sayathapi bhikkhave maya karova maya karante vasiva chatu mahapate mayang vidang sayam Tamenang chakuma puriso passeya nijhayeya yoniso upaparikkeya. Tassatang passato nijhayato yoniso upaparikkato rittakanyeva khayeya tuchakanyeva khayeya asarakanyeva khayeya kinisiya bhikkhvam mayaya saro. Evameva ko bhikkhave yang kinchi viññānaṃ atīta anāgata paccupannam ajhattaṃ vā bahiddhā vā ularikaṃ vā sukumaṃ vā hīnaṃ vā panītaṃ vā yang dure santike vā taṃ bhikkhu passati nijjhāyati yoniso upaparikkati. Tassataṃ passato nijjhāyato yoniso upaparikkato rittakanyeva khāyati tuccakanyeva khāyati asarakanyeva khāyati. Kinisiya bhikkhave ñāne saro. Suppose monks, a magician, or a magician's apprentice should hold a magic show at the four crossroads, and a keen-sighted man should see it, ponder over it, and reflect on it radically. Even as he sees it, ponders over it, and reflects on it radically, he would find it empty. He would find it hollow. He would find it void of essence. What essence, monks, could there be in a magic show? Even so, monks, whatever consciousness, be it past, future, or present, in oneself or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, a monk sees it, ponders over it, and reflects on it radically. Even as he sees it, ponders over it, and reflects on it radically, he would find it empty, he would find it hollow, he would find it void of essence. What essence, monks, could there be in consciousness? Comment. Translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. Suppose, bhikkhus, that a magician or a magician's apprentice would display a magical illusion at a crossroads. A man with good sight would inspect it, ponder it, and carefully investigate it, and it would appear to him to be void, hollow, insubstantial. For what substance could there be in a magical illusion? So too, bhikkhus, whatever kind of consciousness there is, whether past, future, or present, internal or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, a bhikkhu inspects it, ponders it, and carefully investigates it, and it would appear to him to be void, hollow, insubstantial. For what substance could there be in consciousness? And here my translation of the Samyutta Agama parallel. Monks, it is just as if a master magician or the disciple of a master magician at a crossroads creates the magical illusion of an elephant troop, a horse troop, a chariot troop, and an infantry troop. And a wise and clear-sighted person carefully examines, attends to, and analyzes it. At the time of carefully examining, attending to, and analyzing it, he finds that there is nothing in it, nothing stable, nothing substantial. It has no solidity. Why is that? It is because there is nothing solid or substantial in a magical illusion. In the same way, a monk carefully examines, attends to, and analyzes whatever consciousness, past, future, or present, internal or external, gross or subtle, sublime or repugnant, far or near. When carefully examining, attending to, and analyzing it, the monk finds that there is nothing in it, nothing stable, nothing substantial. It has no solidity. It is like a disease, like a carbuncle, like a thorn, like a killer. It is impermanent, dukkha, empty, and not self. Why is that? It is because there is nothing solid or substantial in consciousness. End of comment. So, for the Buddha, consciousness is comparable to a magic show. This is a most extraordinary exposition, not to be found in any other philosophical system, because the soul theory tries to sit pretty on consciousness when all other foundations are shattered. But then, even this citadel itself, the Buddha has described in this discourse as essenceless and hollow, as a magical illusion. Let us now try to clarify for ourselves the full import of this simile of the magic show. A certain magician is going to hold a magic show in some hall or theatre. Among those who have come to see the magic show, there is a witty person with a wisdom eye who tells himself, "Today I must see the magic show inside out." With this determination, he hides himself in a corner of the stage, unseen by others. When the magic show starts, this person begins to discover, before long, the secrets of the magician, his deceitful stock in trade, counterfeits, hidden strings and buttons, secret pockets and false bottoms in his magic boxes. He observes clearly all the secret gadgets that the audience is unaware of. With this vision, he comes to the conclusion that there is no magic in any of those gadgets. Some sort of disenchantment sets in. Now he has no curiosity, amazement, fright, or amusement that he used to get whenever he watched those magic shows. Instead, he now settles into a mood of equanimity. Since there is nothing more for him to see in the magic show, he mildly turns his attention towards the audience. Then he sees the contrast. The entire hall is a sea of craned necks, gaping mouths, and goggle eyes, with ahs and ohs and whistles of speechless amazement. At this sorry sight, he even feels remorseful that he himself was in the same plight before. So in this way he sees through the magic show, an insight instead of a sight. When the show ends, he steps out of the hall and tries to slink away unseen, but he runs into a friend of his, who also was one of the spectators. Now he has to listen to a vivid commentary on the magic show. His friend wants him to join in his appreciation, but he listens through with equanimity. Puzzled by this strange, reserved attitude, the friend asks, "Why, you were in the same hall all this time, weren't you?" "Yes, I was." "Then were you sleeping?" "Oh, no." "You weren't watching closely, I suppose?" "No, no, I was watching it all right. Maybe I was watching too closely." "You say you were watching, but you don't seem to have seen the show." "No, I saw it. In fact, I saw it so well that I missed the show." The above dialogue between the man who watched the show with discernment and the one who watched with naive credulity should give a clue to the riddle-like proclamations of the Buddha in the Kalaka Rama Sutta. The Buddha also was confronted with the same problematic situation after his enlightenment, which was an insight into the magic show of consciousness. That man with discernment hid himself in a corner of the stage to get that insight. The Buddha also had to hide in some corner of the world stage for his enlightenment. The term patisallana, solitude, has a nuance suggestive of a hideaway. It is in such a hideaway that the Buddha witnessed the interior of the sixfold sense space. The reason for his equanimity towards conflicting views about truth and falsehood in the world, as evidenced by this discourse, is the very insight into the six sense spaces. First of all, let us try to compare our parable with the discourse proper. Now the Buddha declares, "Yang bhikkhave sadivakassa lokassa samarakassa sabrahmakassa sassamana brahmaniya pajaya sadeva manusaya nittang sutang mutang vinyatang pattang pariyisitang anuvicharitang manasa tangahang janami. Yang bhikkhave sadivakassa lokassa samarakassa sabrahmakassa sassamana brahmaniya pajaya sadeva manusaya titang sutang mutang vinyatang pattang pariyisitang anuvicharitang manasa tangahang abbanyasim, tang tathagatassa viditang, tang tathagato na upattasi." Monks whatsoever in this world, with its gods, maras, brahmas, among the progeny consisting of recluses and brahmins, gods and men, whatsoever is seen, heard, sensed, cognized, sought after, and pondered over by the mind, all that do I know. Monks whatsoever in the world, with its gods, maras, and brahmas, among the progeny consisting of recluses and brahmins, gods and men, whatsoever is seen, heard, sensed, cognized, sought after, and pondered over by the mind, that have I fully understood. All that is known to the Tathagata, but the Tathagata has not taken his stand upon it. Common translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. Because in this world, with its devas, maras, and brahma, among this population with its ascetics and Brahmins, its devas and humans, whatever is seen, heard, sensed, cognized, reached, sought after, examined by the mind, that I know. Because in this world with its devas, Mara and Brahma, among this population with its ascetics and Brahmins, its devas and humans, whatever is seen, heard, sensed, cognized, reached, sought after, examined by the mind, that I have directly known. It has been known by the Tathagata, but the Tathagata did not become subservient to it. End of comment. Here, the Buddha does not stop after saying that he knows all that, but goes on to declare that he has fully understood all that, and that it is known to the Tathagata. The implication is that he sees through all that, and discovered their vanity, hollowness, and essencelessness. And that is to say, he not only knows, but he has grown wiser. In short, he has seen the magic show so well as to miss the show. Unlike in the case of those worldly spectators, the released mind of the Tathagata did not find anything substantial in the magic show of consciousness. That is why he refused to take his stand upon the sense data. Tang Tathagata na upattasi. The Tathagata has not taken his stand upon it. In contrast to the worldly philosophers, the Tathagatas have no entanglement with all that. Ajyosidang nanti Tathagatanam. The dialogue we have given might highlight these distinctions regarding levels of knowledge. It may also throw more light on the concluding statement that forms the gist of the discourse. Itiko bhikkhave tathagato ditta dittappang dattabbang dittang na manyati adittang na manyati dattabbang na manyati dattarang na manyati sutta so tabbang suttang na manyati asuttang na manyati suttabbang na manyati suttarang na manyati mutta mo tabbang mottang na manyati amuttang ma manyati mottabbang na manyati mottarang na manyati Vinyata vinyatabbang vinyatang namanyati avinyatang namanyati vinyatabbang namanyati vinyatarang namanyati. Thus, monks, the Tathagata does not imagine a visible thing as apart from seeing. He does not imagine an unseen. He does not imagine a thing worth seeing. He does not imagine a seer. He does not imagine an audible thing as apart from hearing. He does not imagine an unheard. He does not imagine a thing worth hearing. He does not imagine a hearer. He does not imagine a thing to be sensed as apart from sensation. He does not imagine an unsensed. He does not imagine a thing worth sensing. He does not imagine one who senses. He does not imagine a cognizable thing as apart from cognition. He does not imagine an uncognized. He does not imagine a thing worth cognizing. He does not imagine one who cognizes. Comment, translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. So, having seen what can be seen, the Tathagata does not misconceive the seen, does not misconceive the unseen, does not misconceive what can be seen, does not misconceive one who sees. Having heard what can be heard, he does not misconceive the heard, does not misconceive the unheard, does not misconceive what can be heard, does not misconceive one who hears. Having sensed what can be sensed, He does not misconceive the sensed, does not misconceive the unsensed, does not misconceive what can be sensed, does not misconceive one who senses. Having cognized what can be cognized, he does not misconceive the cognized, does not misconceive the uncognized, does not misconceive what can be cognized, does not misconceive one who cognizes. End of comment. It is like the hesitation of that man with discernment who, on coming out of the hall, found it difficult to admit categorically that he had seen the magic shown. Since the Tathagata had an insight into the mechanism of the sixfold sense space, that is to say, its conditioned nature, he understood that there is no one to see and nothing to see. Only a seeing is there. The dictum of the Barre Center, in the scene just the scene, ditte dittamatang, which we cited the other day, becomes more meaningful now. Only a seeing is there. Apart from the fact of having seen, there is nothing substantial to see. There is no magic to see. Ditta dattabbang dittang namanyati. He does not imagine a sight worthwhile apart from the seen. There is no room for conceit of having seen a magic show. On the other hand, it is not possible to deny the fact of seeing. Adittang namanyati. He does not imagine an unseen. Now that friend was curious whether this one was asleep during the magic show, but that was not the case either. Dattabbang namanyati. The Tathagata does not imagine a thing worthwhile seeing. The equanimity of that witty man was so much that he turned away from the bogus magic show to have a look at the audience below. This way we can understand how the Tathagata discovered that there is only a scene, but nothing worthwhile seeing. Likewise the phrase dattarang namanyati, he does not imagine a seer, could also be understood in the light of this parable. All those who came out of that hall, except this discerning one, were spectators. He was not one of the audience, because he had an insight into the magic show from his hiding place on the stage. The statement tangahang na janami tibadayang tang mama samusa, if I were to say that I do not know, it would be a falsehood in me, could similarly be appreciated in the light of the dialogue after the magic show. The discerning one could not say that he was not aware of what was going on, because he was fully awake during the magic show. Nor can he say that he was aware of it in the ordinary sense. An affirmation or negation of both standpoints would be out of place. This gives us a clue to understand the two statements of the Tathagata to the effect that he is unable to say that he both knows and does not know. Janami cha na cha janami, and neither knows nor does not know. Neva janami na janami. All this is the result of his high understanding, indicated by the word abhanyasing. The Tathagata saw the magic show of consciousness so well as to miss the show, from the point of view of the worldlings. Now we come to the conclusive declaration. Iti ko bhikkhave tathagato ditta sutta mutta vinyatabbesu dhammesu thadi eva thadi. Tamha cha tadimha anyo thadi uttaritarova panidatarova naditi vadami. Thus monks the Tathagata, being such in regard to all phenomena, seen, heard, sensed and cognized, is such. Moreover than he who is such, there is none other higher or more excellent, I declare. Comment translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. Thus, because being ever stable among things seen, heard, sensed and cognized, the Tathagata is a stable one. And I say there is no stable one more excellent or sublime than that stable one. End of comment. The other day we discussed the implications of the term thadi. The term is usually explained as signifying the quality of remaining unshaken before the 8 worldly vicissitudes. But in this context it has a special significance. It implies an equanimous attitude towards dogmatic views and view holders. This attitude avoids categorical affirmation or negation regarding the question of truth and falsehood. It grants a relative reality to those viewpoints. This is the moral behind the hesitation to give clear-cut answers to that inquisitive friend in our pithy dialogue. It is not the outcome of a dilly-dally attitude. There is something really deep. It is the result of an insight into the magic show. The reason for this suchness is the understanding of the norm of dependent arising known as tathata. It is obvious from the exposition of the norm of dependent arising that there are two aspects involved, namely anuloma, direct order, and patiloma, indirect order. The direct order is to be found in the first half of the 12 linked formula, beginning with the word avidya paccaya sankhara, dependent on ignorance preparations, while the indirect order is given in the second half with the words avidyaya tveva sesa viraga nirodha, etc., with the remainderless fading away and cessation of ignorance, etc. The implication is that where there is ignorance, aggregates of grasping get accumulated, which in other words is a heaping up of suffering. That is a fact. But then when ignorance fades away and ceases, they do not get accumulated. Now, with this magic show as an illustration, we can get down to a deeper analysis of the law of dependent arising. In a number of earlier sermons, we have already made an attempt to explain a certain deep dimension of this law, with the help of illustrations from the dramatic and cinematographic fields. The magic show we have brought up now is even more striking as an illustration. In the case of the cinema, the background of darkness we compare to the darkness of ignorance. Because of the surrounding darkness, those who go to the cinema take as real whatever they see on the screen and create for themselves various moods and emotions. In the case of the magic show, the very ignorance of the tricks of the magician is what accounts for the apparent reality of the magic performance. Once the shroud of ignorance is thrown off, the magic show loses its magic for the audience. The magician's secret stock in trade gave rise to the sankharas or preparations, with the help of which the audience created for themselves a magic show. To that discerning man who viewed the show from his hiding place on the stage, there were no such preparations. That is why he proverbially missed the show. The same principle holds good in the case of the magical illusions, maya, that is consciousness. A clear instance of this is the reference in the Mahavidalla Sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya to Vijnana, consciousness, and Panya, wisdom, as two conjoined psychological states. They cannot be separated one from the other, sangsapta no visangsapta, but they can be distinguished functionally. Out of them, wisdom is to be developed, while consciousness is to be comprehended. Panya bhavitabba vijnanam parinyayam. The development of wisdom is for the purpose of comprehending consciousness, and comprehended consciousness proves to be empty, essenceless, and hollow. It is such a transformation that took place within the person who watched the magic show with discernment. He watched it too closely, so much so that the preparation, sankhara, in the form of the secret stock in trade of the magician became ineffective and nugatory. This makes clear the connection between ignorance, avidya, and preparation, sankhara. That is why ignorance takes precedence in the formula of dependent arising. Preparations owe their effectiveness to ignorance. They are dependent on ignorance. To understand preparations for what they are is knowledge. Simultaneously with the arising of that knowledge, preparations become mere preparations or pure preparations, Suddha Sankara. This gives us the clue to unravel the meaning of the verse in the Adimotta Theragatha quoted earlier. Suddhang Dhamma Samuppadang Suddhang Sankara Santating Pasantasa Yatha Bhutang Nabhayang Hoti Gamani. To one who sees the rising of pure Dhammas and the sequence of pure preparations as they are, there is no fear, O headman. Common translation by K.R. Norman. There is no fear for one who sees, as they really are, the pure and simple rising of phenomena, and the pure and simple causal continuity of the constituent elements. Chieftain. End of comment. In a limited sense, we can say that graspings relating to a magic show did not get accumulated in the mind of that discerning person, while his friend was gathering them eagerly. The latter came out of the hall as if coming out of the magic world. He had been amassing graspings proper to a magic world, due to his ignorance of those preparations. From this one may well infer that if at any point of time consciousness is comprehended by wisdom, preparations, sankhara, become mere preparations, or pure preparations. Being influx-free, they do not go to build up a prepared sankata. They do not precipitate an amassing of grasping upadana to bring about an existence bhava. This amounts to a release from existence. One seems to be in the world, but one is not of the world. That man with discernment was in the hall all that time, but it was as if he was not there. Let us now go deeper into the implications of the term tadi, such with reference to the law of dependent arising known as tathata, suchness. From the dialogue that followed the magic show, it is clear that there are 2 points of view. We have here a question of 2 different points of view. If we are to explain these 2 viewpoints with reference to the law of dependent arising, we may allude to the distinction made, for instance, in the Nidāna Samyutta, between the basic principle of dependent arising and the phenomena dependently arisen. We have already cited the relevant declaration. Paticca samuppadancha vo bhikkhave disasami paticca samuppanne cha dhamme. Monks, I shall preach to you dependent arising and things that are dependently arisen. Sometimes 2 significant terms are used to denote these 2 aspects, namely hetu and hetu samuppanna dhamma. About the Aryan disciple, be he even a stream winner, it is said that his understanding of dependent arising covers both these aspects. Hetu cha sudittu, hetu samuppanna cha dhamma. The cause, as well as the thing arisen from a cause, are well seen or understood by him. As we pointed out in our discussion of the Hilltop Festival in connection with the Upatissa Kolita episode, the disenchantment with the Hilltop Festival served as a setting for their encounter with the Venerable Assaji. As soon as Venerable Assaji uttered the significant pity verse, Ye dhamma hetu pabhava, tesang hetung tathagato aha, tesang chayo nirodho, evang badi mahasamano. Of things that proceed from a cause, their cause the Tathagata has told, and also their cessation. Thus teaches the great ascetic. The wandering ascetic Upatissa, who was to become Venerable Sariputta later, grasped the clue to the entire samsaric riddle then and there, and discovered the secret of the magic show of consciousness even by the first 2 lines. That was because he excelled in wisdom. As soon as he heard the lines of things that proceed from a cause, their cause the Tathagata has told, he understood the basic principle of dependent arising. Yang kinchi samudaya dhammang sabbang tang nirodha dhammang. Whatever is of a nature to rise, all that is of a nature to cease. The wandering ascetic Kolita, however, became a stream winner only on hearing all 4 lines. This pity verse has been variously interpreted, but the word hetu in this verse has to be understood as a reference to the law of dependent arising. When asked what paticca samuppada is, the usual answer is a smattering of the 12 linked formula in direct and reverse order. The most important normative prefatory declaration is ignored. Imasming sati idang hoti, imassa upada idang uppanjati, imasming asati idang nahoti, imassa niruddha idang nirujjati. This being, this comes to be. With the rising of this arises. This not being, this does not come to be. With the cessation of this ceases. The statement of the basic principle of dependent arising is very often overlooked. It is this basic principle that finds expression in that pithy verse. The line Ye Dhamma Hetu Bhambhavam of things that proceed from a cause is generally regarded as a reference to the first link avidya. But this is not the case. All the 12 links are dependently arisen, and avidya is no exception. Even ignorance arises with the arising of influxes. Asava samudaya avidya samudaya. Here we have something extremely deep. The allusion here is to the basic principle couched in the phrases imasming sati idang hoti, etc. In such discourses as the Bahudhatuka Sutta, the 12-linked formula is introduced with a set of these thematic phrases, which is then related to the formula proper with the conjunctive, that is to say, yaridam. This conjunctive clearly indicates that the 12-linked formula is an illustration. The 12 links are therefore things dependently arisen, paticca samuppanna dhamma. They are all arisen from a cause, hetu pabhava dhamma. So even ignorance is not the cause. The cause is the underlying principle itself. This being, this comes to be. With the rising of this arises. This not being, this does not come to be. With the cessation of this ceases. This is the norm, the suchness, tathata, that the Buddha discovered. That man with discernment at the magic show, looking down at the audience with commiseration, had a similar sympathetic understanding born of realization. I too have been in this same sorry plight before. Due to ignorance, a sequence of phenomena occurs, precipitating a heaping of graspings. With the cessation of ignorance, all that comes to cease. It is by seeing the cessation that the momentous inner transformation took place. The insight into this cessation brings about the realization that all what the worldlings take as absolutely true, permanent, or eternal are mere phenomena arisen from the mind. Manopubhangama Dhamma, mind is the forerunner of all mind objects. One comes to understand that all what is arisen is bound to cease, and that the cessation can occur here and now. In discussing the formula of paticca samuppada, the arising of the 6 sense bases is very often explained with reference to a mother's womb. It is the usual practice to interpret such categories as nama rupa, name and form, and salayatana, 6 sense bases, purely in physiological terms. But for the Buddha, the arising of the 6 sense bases was not a stage in the growth of a fetus in the mother's womb. It was through wisdom that he saw the 6 bases of sense contact arising then and there, according to the formula beginning with Chakkuncha paticca rupecha bhajati chakku viññāṇam. Dependent on eye and form arises eye consciousness, etc. They are of a nature of arising and ceasing, like that magic show. Everything in the world is of a nature to arise and cease. The words Ye Dhamma Hetu Pabhava, of things that proceed from a cause, etc., is an enunciation of that law. Any explanation of the law of dependent arising should rightly begin with the basic principle imasming sati idang hoti. This being, this comes to be, etc. This confusion regarding the way of explaining paticca samuppada is a case of missing the wood for the trees. It is as if the Buddha stretches his arm and says, "That is a forest," and one goes and catches hold of a tree explaining, this is the forest. To rattle off the 12 links in the hope of grasping the law of Paticca is like counting the number of trees in order to see the forest. Comment. Yeah, I found this very much to the point, and this image of catching hold of the tree and saying, this is the forest is very pertinent. The basic principle I wanted to mention, I think my understanding is that this is not just about conditionality as such. I mean, some degree of conditionality is known to anyone. I mean, even animals are aware of some degree of conditionality. Otherwise, they would not be able to survive. It is by knowing that if I act in a certain way, I can avoid being killed by a predatory animal, or I can get some food. This kind of basic conditionality is necessary for survival for animals out in nature. So the point of specific conditionality, I think, is not just that specific causes have specific results, but that anything that there is at all, without any exception, is the result of causes and conditions. And this comes really fully clear only when the full statement of specific conditional is given, and not just this being this comes to be, but this not being this does not come to be, in the sense that anything that is entirely dependent on specific conditions, and in the absence of these specific conditions, this does not exist. This is also why I find it difficult to imagine that Venerable Sariputta understood already after the first two lines. It seems to me that the verses Ye Dhamma Hetu Pabbhava Te Sanghetum Tathagato Te Sangchayo Nirodho, that this pointing to cessation is necessary to get the full point. And I think we can also use the beautiful illustration with the magician's show that Venerable Ñāṇananda has given to get further at this point. The other spectators there in that hall, they were also aware of some degree of conditionality. They were aware that because the magician put that box and then he showed us and it's empty, and he put it down and then he pulled out things. So some conditionality in this seeing him produce something out of the empty box is there, but they did not see all of the conditions. In particular, they missed out the one most important specific condition, the false bottom in the box, which then explains the full thing. So I think that the point really is this vision that, and which indeed makes it missing the forest for the trees when we just look at the individual links. The point is really this vision of everything that there is whatsoever is just causes and condition, nothing else. End of comment. Let us now examine the connection between the law of dependent arising paticca samuppada and things dependently arisen paticca samuppanna dhamma. Worldlings do not even understand things dependently arisen as dependently arisen. They are fully involved in them, and that itself is samsara. One who has seen the principle of paticca samuppada understands the dictum avidyaya sati sankhara honti. Preparations are there only when ignorance is there. So he neither grasps ignorance nor does he grasp preparations. Another short comment. I think it is good to keep in mind that the Venerable earlier spoke of like pure preparations that are left when our ignorance has been eradicated. So when he says here preparations are there only when ignorance is there, he is specifically talking about those preparations, those sankharas that lead on to dukkha. An arahant still has sankharas, he or she still takes volitional decisions. An arahant still has consciousness, name and form, etc. But none of these leads to dukkha. So I just wanted to remind of that earlier clear distinction the Venerable draws in order to make sure that the present discussion is not leading to any kind of misunderstanding. End of comment. In fact, to dwell on the law of dependent arising is the way to liberate the mind from the whole of dependently arisen things. Now, why do we say so? Every one of those 12 links, according to the Buddha, is impermanent, prepared, dependently arisen, of a nature to wither away, wear away, fade away, and cease. Anicchang, sankatang, paticca samapannang, kaya dhammang, vaya dhammang, viraga dhammang, nirodha dhammang. Comment translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. Impermanent, conditioned, dependently arisen, subject to destruction, vanishing, fading away, and cessation. End of comment. The very first link avidya is no exception. They are impermanent because they are made up or prepared, sankata. The term sankatang has nuances of artificiality and spuriousness. All the links are therefore unreal in the highest sense. They are dependent on contact, passive, and therefore dependently arisen. It is in their nature to wither away, wear away, fade away, and cease. When one has understood this as a fact of experience, one brings one's mind to rest, not on the things dependently arisen, but on the law of dependent arising itself. There is something extraordinary about this. One must not miss the wood for the trees. When the Buddha stretches his arms and says, "That is a forest," he does not expect us to go and grasp any of the trees, or to go on counting them, so as to understand what a forest is. One has to get a synoptic view of it from here itself. Such a view takes into account not only the trees, but also the intervening spaces between them, all at one synoptic glance. In order to get a correct understanding of paticca samuppada from a pragmatic point of view, one has to bring one's mind to rest on the norm that obtains between every two links. But this is something extremely difficult, because the world is steeped in the notion of duality. It grasps either this end or the other end. Hard it is for the world to understand the stance of the Arahant, couched in the cryptic phrase Nevidha, Nahurang, Na Ubhayamantare. Neither here nor there nor in between the two. The worldling is accustomed to grasp either this end or the other end. For instance, one may grasp either ignorance, avidya, or preparation, sankhara. But here we have neither. When one dwells on the interrelation between them, one is at least momentarily free from ignorance as well as from the delusive nature of preparations. Taking the magic show itself as an illustration, let us suppose that the magician is performing a trick, which earlier appeared as a miracle. But now that one sees the counterfeits, hidden strings and secret bottoms, one is aware of the fact that the magical effect is due to the evocative nature of those preparations. So he does not take seriously those preparations. His ignorance is thereby reduced to the same extent. This is how each of those links gets worn out, as the phrase Kaya Dhammang, Vaya Dhammang, Viraga Dhammang, Nirodha Dhammang suggests. All the links are of a nature to wither away, wear away, fade away, and cease. So then preparations are there only when ignorance is there. The preparations are effective only so long as ignorance is there. With the rising of ignorance, preparations arise. When ignorance is not there, preparations lose their provenance. With the complete fading away and cessation of ignorance, preparations too fade away and cease without residue. This then is the relationship between those two links. Let us go for another instance to illustrate this point further. Sankhara paccaya viññānam. Dependent on preparations is consciousness. Generally, the worldlings are prone to take consciousness as a compact unit. They regard it as their self or soul. When everything else slips out from their grasp, they grasp consciousness as their soul because it is invisible. Now, if someone is always aware that consciousness arises dependent on preparations, that with the arising of preparations consciousness arises, always specific and never abstract, consciousness ceases to appear as a monolithic whole. This particular I consciousness has arisen because of I and forms. This particular ear consciousness has arisen because of ear and sound, and so on. This kind of reflection and constant awareness of the part played by preparations in the rising of consciousness will conduce to the withering away, wearing away, and fading away of consciousness. Disgust, disillusionment, and dejection in regard to consciousness is what accounts for its complete cessation, sooner or later. Consciousness is dependent on preparations, and name and form is dependent on consciousness. The worldling does not even recognize Nama Rupa as such. We have already analyzed the mutual relationship between name and form as a reciprocity between nominal form and formal name. They always go together and appear as a reflection on consciousness. Here is a case of entanglement within and an entanglement without. Antojata, bahijata. We brought in a simile of a dog on a plank to illustrate the involvement with name and form. When one understands that this name and form, which the world takes as real and calls one's own, is a mere reflection on consciousness, one does not grasp it either. To go further, when one attends to the fact that the six sense bases are dependent on name and form, and that they are there only as long as name and form is there, and that with the cessation of name and form the six sense bases also cease, one is attuning one's mind to the law of dependent arising, thereby weaning one's mind away from its hold on dependently arisen things. Similarly, contact arises in dependence on the six sense bases. Generally, the world is enslaved by contact. In the Nandakovada Sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya, there is a highly significant dictum stressing the specific character of contact as such. Tajjang tajjang bhante paccayang paticca tajja tajja vedana upabhajanti. Tajjassa tajjassa paccayassa niruddha tajja tajja vedana nirujjanti. Dependent on each specific condition, Venerable Sir, specific feelings arise. And with the cessation of each specific condition, specific feelings cease. Comment translation by Bhikkhu Ñāṇananda. Each feeling arises in dependence upon its corresponding condition, and with the cessation of its corresponding condition, the feeling ceases. Enter Samyukta Agama. In dependence on this and that factor arises. In dependence on the cessation of this and that arisen factor will consequently cease, be extinguished, disappear, and become truly cool. End of comment. The understanding that contact is dependent on the six sense bases enables one to overcome the delusion arising out of contact. Since it is conditioned and limited by the six sense bases, with their cessation it has to cease. Likewise, to attend to the specific contact as the cause of feeling is the way of disenchantment with both body and with both feeling and contact. Finally, when one understands that this existence is dependent on grasping, rising out of craving, one will not take existence seriously. Dependent on existence is birth, bhava pachaya jati. While the magic show was going on, the spectators found themselves in a magic world because they grasped the magic in it. Even so, existence, bhava, is dependent on grasping upadana. Just as one seated on his side of a parapet wall might not see what is on the other side, what we take as our existence in the world is bounded by our parents from the point of view of birth. What we take as death is the end of this physical body. We are ignorant of the fact that it is a flux of preparation, sankhara santati. Existence is therefore something prepared or made up. Birth is dependent on existence. Sometimes we happen to buy from a shop an extremely rickety machine, deceived by its paint and polish, and take it home as a brand new thing. The very next day it goes out of order. Comment: this is something we can experience quite regularly in Sri Lanka, maybe less regular experience in the West, so also not entirely unknown. End of comment. The newly bought item was born only the previous day, and now it is out of order, to our disappointment. So is our birth with its unpredictable vicissitudes, taking us through decay, disease, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. This is the price we pay for this brand new body we are blessed with in this existence. In this way, we can examine the relation between any two links of the formula of dependent arising. It is the insight into this norm that constitutes the understanding of paticca samuppada, and not the parrot-like recitation by heart of the formula in direct and reverse order. Of course, the formulation in direct and reverse order has its own special significance, which highlights the fact that the possibility of a cessation of those 12 links lies in their arising nature itself. Whatever is of a nature to arise, all that is of a nature to cease. Yam kinchi samudaya dhammang sabbang tang nirodha dhammang. As for the Arahant, he has realized this fact in a way that the influxes are made extinct. To go further into the significance of the formula, we may examine why ignorance, avidya, takes precedence in it. This is not because it is permanent or uncaused. The deepest point in the problem of release from samsara is traceable to the term asava or influxes. Influxes are sometimes reckoned as fourfold, namely those of sensuality, kamasava, of existence, bhavasava, of views, ditthasava, and of ignorance. Comment: the ditthasava, the influx of views, seems to be a later element. It is not found in the suttas except for some editions of the Mahaparinibbāna Sutta. And the Mahaparinibbāna Sutta is actually quite a late text. It is not really originally a sutta. As far as we know, it originated in a Vinaya context as an attempt to draw up a story, history of the Buddha's passing away and events that happened afterwards. And so the Mahaparinibbāna Sutta has vocabulary and also sometimes narrative elements, and we'll come to that later, that are more typical for Vinaya literature, which together with early material reflects developments that are more evolved than what we usually find in the discourses. End of comment. But more often, in contexts announcing the attainment of arahanthood, the standard reference is to three types of influxes: kamasavapi cittang vimucchati, bhavasavapi cittang vimucchati, avidyasavapi cittang vimucchati. The mind is released from influxes of sensuality, existence, and ignorance. This is because the influxes of ignorance could easily include those of views as well. The term asava implies those corrupting influences ingrained in beings due to samsaric habits. They have a tendency to flow in and tempt beings towards sensuality, existence, and ignorance. It might be difficult to understand why even ignorance is reckoned as a kind of influx, while it is recognized as the first link in the chain of dependent arising. Ignorance, or ignoring, is itself a habit. There's a tendency in samsaric beings to grope in darkness and dislike light. They have a tendency to blink at the light and ignore it. It is easy to ignore and forget. This forgetting trait enables them to linger long in samsara. Comment, I find this very powerful. Our tendency to grope in darkness and dislike light. And I would like to also relate this to the simile of the magical illusion of consciousness. Usually when we go to a magical show, we actually want to be deceived. And this is precisely our wanting to ignore, groping in the darkness, forgetting, that enables us to linger long in samsara. End of comment. Ignorance as a kind of influxus is so powerful that even the keenest in wisdom cannot attain arahanthood at once. The wheel of Dhamma has to turn 4 times, hence the fourfold distinction as stream winner, once returner, non-returner, and arahant. The difficulty of combating this onslaught of influxes is already insinuated by the term sattakattatupavama, 7 more lives at the most, designating a stream winner, and the term sakadagami, once returner. The way to cut off these influxes is the very insight into the law of dependent arising. Sometimes the path is defined as the law of dependent arising itself. That doesn't mean the ability to rattle off the 12 links by heart, but the task is of bringing the mind to rest on the norm of paticcasamuppada itself. Imasming sati idam hoti, imassa uppada idam uppajjati, imasming asati idam na hoti, imassa nirodha idam nirujjati. This being, this comes to be. With the rising of this, this arises. This not being, this does not come to be. With the cessation of this, this ceases. It is an extremely difficult task because the mind tends to slip off. The habitual tendency is to grasp this one or the other. The worldling, for the most part, rests on a duality. Not to cling even to the middle is the ideal of an arahant. That is the implication of the conclusive statement in the advice to Bahya, Nibbāna na hurang na ubhayamantarena. Neither here nor there nor in between the two. For clarity's sake, let us give the relevant section in full. Yatutvang bahyana tena, tatutvang bahyana tatta. Yatutvang bahyana tatta, tatutvang bahyana nibbāna hurang na ubhayamantarena. Esivanto dukkasa. And when Bahya you are not by it, then Bahya you are not in it. And when Bahya you are not in it, then Bahya you are neither here nor there nor in between. This itself is the end of suffering. Comment translation by Ireland. When Bahya you are not with it, then Bahya you will not be in that. When Bahya you are not in that, then Bahya you will be neither here nor beyond nor in between the two. Just this is the end of suffering. The additional reading I wanted to offer for this lecture is a study of the Bahya instruction, in which I defend the position taken by Venerable Ñāṇaponika that there's a place for bare awareness. He calls that bare attention in early Buddhist meditation practice. And I'm using the Mālaṅkyaputta Sutta, the discourse where the same instruction given to Bahya is also given to another monk as a kind of canonical commentary, because the this instruction to Malonkya-Putta, and then the Buddha asked Malonkya-Putta how he understands that instruction on in the scene, just the scene, and not being in that and not being in between, etc. And Malonkya-Putta then comes out with a series of verses in explanation. And since the Buddha agrees to that, it is clear that this is an acceptable commentary. And we are also very fortunate in having this discourse not only in Pali, but also Chinese and Tibetan parallels, so they can be compared, which therefore makes the instruction to Barre, which in the Udana is the Pali Udana version, has no parallel, which makes this instruction then stand on solid ground in early Buddhism, as we have parallel versions. And I also wanted to just mention, because I think that came up earlier in a comment somewhere on the forum, we have to keep in mind here that when Venerable Ñāṇananda, when he was giving these sermons, there was not yet any digitalization of the Pali Canon. So he is giving all this amazing range of references just based on memory. And I've myself noticed that when visiting him, you say something and he has an incredible had an incredible memory, just picking up passages and reciting the whole Pali. But the fact that he, for some reason, has not remembered the Malonkya-Putta instruction, not brought that in as a comment on the Bhaya instruction, is really should really be neglected in view of his amazing memory and familiarity with the suttas. And I mean, for somebody like me who forgets, I might already have forgotten now what I said at the beginning of the lecture, but I have that digital search, so I just go Ditamatang and zip, and I come to the Malonkya-Putta Sutta. So it's just the advantage we have of the digitalization that makes it very easy to find relevant parallel passages. I just wanted to clarify that. End of comment. So one who has fully understood the norm of paticca samuppada is not attached to ignorance, nor is he attached to preparations, since he has seen the relatedness between them. He is attached neither to preparations nor to consciousness, having seen the relatedness between them. The insight into this dependent arising and ceasing promotes such a detached attitude. It is this insight that inculcated in the Tathagata that supreme and excellent suchness. His neutral attitude was not the result of any lack of knowledge or tactical ego-wriggling, as in the case of Sanjaya Vilatiputta. Why does the Tathagata not declare the sense data categorically as true or false? He knows that, given ignorance, they are true, and that they are falsified only when ignorance fades away in one who sees the cessation. It is for such a person that the sense basis appears false, and consciousness appears as a conjurer's trick. Fortified with that understanding, he does not categorically assert the sense data as true, nor does he reprimand those who assert them as the truth. That is why the Buddha advocates a tolerant attitude in his discourse. This is the typical attitude of an understanding elder to the questions put by an inquisitive toddler. Generally, the dogmatists in the world are severely entrenched in their own individual viewpoints, as the line Pacceka Satchesu Puttuni Vitta suggests. We explained the term Saya Samutta as on a par with the phrase Pacceka Satchesu. The problematic term Saya Samutta is suggestive of a virulent self-opinionatedness. Why are they committed and limited by their own views? Our quotation from the Chulavyuha Sutta holds the answer. Naheva sacchani bahuni nana anyatra sanyaya nitinchani loke. There are no several and various truths that are permanent in the world apart from perception. Comment translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. Truths surely are not many and diverse, except by mistakenly perceiving permanent things in the world. End of comment. According to one level of perception, one forms a notion of reality. To those in the audience, the tricks of the magician remained concealed. It is that ignorance which arouses preparation, sankhara, in them. A typical illustration of individual truths, Pacceka Satya, is found in the chapter titled Yachanda, congenitally blind in the Udana. There the Buddha brings up a parallel of the blind man and the elephant. A certain king got a crowd of congenitally blind men assembled, and having made them touch various limbs of an elephant, asked them what an elephant looks like. Those who touched the elephant's head compared the elephant to a pot. Those who touched its ears compared it to a winnowing basket. Those who touched its tusk compared it to a plowshare, and so forth. The dogmatic views in the world follow the same trend. All that is due to contact, passapaccaya, says the Buddha in the Brahmajala Sutta, even with reference to those who have supernormal knowledges, abhinya. Depending on name and form which they grasped, they evolve dogmatic theories based on their perceptions, spurred on by sense contact. Their dogmatic involvement is revealed by the thematic assertion idameva satyam mogang anyam. This alone is true, all else is false. The Buddha had no dogmatic involvement because he had seen the cessation of consciousness. Even the mind ceases and mind objects fade away. That is why the Buddha was tolerantly neutral. On many such issues, silence happens to be the answer. This brings us to an extremely deep dimension of this Dhamma. Just as that man with discerning wisdom at the magic show had difficulties in coming to terms with the naive magic fan, so the Buddha, too, had to face situations where problems of communication cropped up. We come across such an instance in the Nibbāna Sutta. On his way to Kusinara to attain Parinibbāna, the Buddha happened to rest under a tree for a while to overcome fatigue. Pukusa of Malla, a disciple of Kalama, who was coming from Kusinara on his way to Pava, saw the Buddha seated there and approached him. After worshipping him, he made the joyful utterance, Santena vatabhanta bhabbajita viharena viharanti. Venerable Sir, those who have gone forth are indeed living a peaceful life. Though it was apparently a compliment for the Buddha, he came out with an episode which was rather in praise of his teacher Kalama, who had attained to the plane of nothingness, Akinchanyayatana. While on a long journey, my teacher Kalama sat under a wayside tree for a noonday siesta. Just then 500 carts were passing by. After the carts had passed that spot, the man who was following them walked up to Kalama and asked him, Venerable Sir, did you see about 500 carts passing by? No, friend, I didn't see. But, Venerable Sir, didn't you even hear the sound? No, friend, I didn't hear the sound. Venerable Sir, were you asleep then? No, friend, I was not asleep. Were you conscious then, Venerable Sir? Yes, friend. So then, Venerable Sir, while being conscious and awake, you neither saw nor heard as many as 500 carts passing by. All the same, your double robe is bespattered with mud. Yes, friend. And then, Venerable Sir, that man was highly impressed by it, and paid the following compliment to Kalama. It is a wonder, it is a marvel, what a peaceful life those who have gone forth are leading, so much so that one being conscious and awake would neither see nor hear as many as 500 cars passing by. Comment, the reference to his robe being bespattered by mud is meant to imply that the carts must have driven very, very close to Kalama so that they dirtied him, and still he didn't see or hear them. End of comment. When Pukusa cited this incident in praise of Kalama, the Buddha asked him, What do you think, Pukusa? Which of these two feats is more difficult to accomplish? that one being conscious and awake would neither see nor hear as many as 500 carts passing by, or that while being conscious and awake one would not see or hear the streaks of lightning and peals of thunder in the midst of a torrential downpour. When Pokusa grants that the latter feat is by far the more difficult to accomplish, the Buddha comes out with one of his past experiences. At one time, Pokusa was staying in a chuff house at Atuma, and there was a torrential downpour, with streaks of lightning and peals of thunder, during the course of which 2 farmers, brothers, and 4 bulls were struck down dead. A big crowd of people had gathered at the spot. Coming out of the chuff house, I was pacing up and down in open air, when a man from that crowd walked up to me and worshipped me, and respectfully stood on one side. Then I asked him, "Friend, why has this big crowd gathered here?" And just now, Venerable Sir, while it was raining in torrents with streaks of lightning and peals of thunder, 2 farmers, brothers, and 4 bulls were struck down dead. That is why a big crowd has gathered here. But where were you, Venerable Sir? I was here itself, friend. But didn't you see it, Venerable Sir? No, friend, I didn't see it. But didn't you hear the sound, Venerable Sir? No, friend, I did not hear the sound. But then, Venerable Sir, were you asleep? No, friend, I was not asleep. But, Venerable Sir, were you conscious? Sanyi? Yes, friend. And then, Pokusa, that man expressed his surprise in the words, "It is a wonder, it is a marvel. What a peaceful life those who have gone forth are leading, so much so that while being conscious and awake, one would neither see nor hear the streaks of lightning and peals of thunder in the midst of a torrential downpour." With that he came out with his fervent faith in me, worshipped me, reverentially circumambulated me, and left. Comment, yeah, I here give Walsh's translation. And I also checked the parallels, and the parallel versions we have give a similar story. However, I would like to express my reservations. These are not based on comparative study, as I'm not able to bring up any parallel that differs, but just on the general assessment of the Mahaparinibbana Sutta as a rather late text. And so we sometimes get episodes that I doubt are early, and this is one of them. I find it rather difficult to imagine the Buddha reacting to hearing somebody praise his own former teacher by trying to best and show that he can even do better than that. This is just so much out of keeping with the absence of any kind of conceit of an arahant or the Buddha himself, that my personal take, and as I said, this is my personal opinion, not based on any hard evidence I have, but my personal take is to consider this as a later story. And it would be very natural if we keep in mind that Alara Kalama was one of the 2 teachers under whom the Buddha studied. And so in later times, when the Buddha had passed away, some of his disciples may have felt a need to show to make it very clear that the Buddha had surpassed Alara Kalama. Because followers of Alara Kalama might just have said, well, who is this teacher of yours, the Buddha? He is a student of our teacher, no? And so to just show that how much the Buddha had surpassed their teacher, even in such achievements as depth of concentrative absorption, it would have been very natural for such a story to develop, where the Buddha himself states, look, excuse me, the Buddha himself says, look here, Alara Kalama doesn't hear this, but I am even better than that in terms of concentrative power. So this is just my personal take on this story. End of comment. Some interpret this incident as an illustration of the Buddha's attainment to the cessation of perceptions and feelings. But if it had been the case, the words Sanyi Samanu Jagaro, while being conscious and awake, would be out of place. That man expressed his wonder at the fact that the Buddha, while being conscious and awake, had not seen or heard anything, though it was raining in torrents with streaks of lightning and peals of thunder. Nor can this incident be interpreted as a reference to the realm of nothingness, akinchanyayatana, in the context of the allusion to Alara Kalama and his less impressive psychic powers. The true import of this extraordinary psychic feat has to be assessed with reference to the Arahata Palasamadhi we have already discussed. The incidents had occurred while the Buddha was seated in Arahata Palasamadhi, experiencing the cessation of the six sense spheres, equivalent to the cessation of the world. He had gone beyond the world. That is why he didn't see or hear. We are now in a position to appreciate meaningfully that much vexed riddle-like verse we had quoted earlier from the Kalahavivada Sutta. Na sanya sanyi, na visanya sanyi, nopya sanyi, na vibhuta sanyi, evang samitasa vibhodhi rupang, sanya nidānahi papancha sankha. He is not conscious of normal perception, nor is he unconscious. He is not devoid of perception, nor has he rescinded perception. It is to one thus constituted that form ceases to exist, for reckonings through prolificity have perception as their source. Comment translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. Nor percipient through perception, nor percipient through disturbed perception, not altogether without perception, nor percipient of what has vanished. Form vanishes for one who has so attained, for concepts due to proliferation are based on perception. End of comment. Perception is the source of all prolific reckonings, such as those that impel the audience at the magic show to respond with ah and oh and whistles. One is completely free from that prolific perception when one is in the Arahata Phala Samadhi, experiencing the cessation of the six sense spheres. As we have earlier cited, one is neither percipient of earth in earth, nor of water in water, nor of fire in fire, nor of air in air, nor is one conscious of this world in this world, nor of another world in another world, and so on. But all the same one is percipient, sanyicipanasan. Of what is he percipient or consciousness? That is none other than what comes up as the title of the series of sermons, namely etang santang etang panitang yadidang sabba sankara samato sabbo paripati nisango tanakayo virago nirodo nibbana. This is peaceful, this is excellent, namely the stilling of all preparations, the relinquishment of all assets, the destruction of craving, detachment, cessation, extinction.